Hey everyone, this is JC, product designer and developer, and today we're here with Toby for another episode to share everything that we are learning about MCP, MCP apps, and all other news that are happening in this whole new crazy world. And Toby has some interesting news that he's going to share with everyone. Toby, before you do that, could you do a quick intro?
Sure, I'm Toby, the CEO of Optical Design, who will try and help people really think about the UX for their MCP apps to make sure they're as useful as possible. And as what JC says, we're really just trying to help share what we're thinking about and what we're learning about this space as it is moving so fast. And really, what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about the various app stores for MCP apps. So, what's interesting? I mean, MCP has obviously been around for a while, but what is I think is a bit unusual about MCP apps is that to really make them easy to use, that OpenAI, I think it created its app store end of last year, started letting people insert apps into them, and so it's a bit easier to use MCP apps. So if we look at the OpenAI, you've got the whole app store here. You can actually, and when you submit your apps, you can actually talk about them, show what they're about, allow people to connect. And what happens is when you do that, it actually connects it to your OpenAI account, so that whenever you go into a chat, you can easily add that. So it's not really locally. It's actually connected to your account in the cloud, and that's different than using tools like Cursor or Cursor or VS Code, because they're more done locally, or at least the MCP was historically done locally, and then it developed into the cloud. But by connecting into having the App Store and connecting to your account, it's much easier to set it up. So most users don't have to worry about all the complex, setup strings for MCP. You can just add it to your account. And relatively recently, Claude did a similar thing. Claude created they call them connectors. These are MCP and MCP apps, where you can, look at all the different options. I'm sorry, there's my MCP app gone. Take it off my account. Settings. Let's get the list up. And here you go to browser connectors, and then you can see all the ones that are available. And in a similar way that you have to do, it's like traditional app stores. In a similar way with OpenAI, we have to submit the app. You have to prove that it's not doing anything bad. You've thought you have some assets in terms of how it looks and how it works and what permissions it needs. Claude did the similar process. That you have to submit your app as a whole big form. You have to fill in. So there's some sort of checking to make sure you're not doing bad things, which is why the upshot is it makes it easier to connect to these apps. Again, it connects to your Claude account, so you can work in the cloud. You don't have to have anything locally on the computer. Which is really helpful. And I think this is interesting for me because this is going to make it much easier for people to use these things. They don't have to set anything up. They just add it and say, hey, talk to a Scala drawer about, producing an image for me, add that in the MCP app, and then it'll deliver that for you. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing. What I haven't really seen yet, which is always what we talk about, is discoverability piece, where, ultimately the model will be suggesting MCP apps or MCPs to use to help you with whatever you're trying to do. That hasn't been switched on OpenAI or Claude as far as I've seen. At the moment, you have to specify which one you want to use for your particular task. So it's still no one's really unlocked that fully. But I think the interesting thing for me is that a couple of days ago, Microsoft announced that they're going to enable MCP apps inside Microsoft Copilot. Now, Elliot from App Discoverability sent a message about this. And this is a big deal because this is another huge group of people, group of users. ChatGPT has 900 million weekly active users. Microsoft 365 has 400 million paid seats. Now, actually, this is probably a more valuable audience because these are paid seats. A lot of the users and the weekly active users for OpenAI are unpaid users. They're just free users of ChatGPT, whereas the Microsoft group is paid users. So, there is a really powerful audience coming to MCP apps. And I think we haven't yet seen, I don't think, what their app store, or if Microsoft is going to have an app store. Obviously, Elliot is, and App Discoverability team are all over this to see, when it's going to become available. So I think checking their website will be one of the first places you'll see it when it happens. But I think this is going to be a really interesting next audience. I mean, again, for me, this is extra information about, the power of MCP apps and why everyone is buying into it. So more validation of this as being an important sort of platform. But I think this is a really interesting thing to keep aware of, that now you've got, because obviously a 365 user predominantly is business users. So this is a really valuable audience for people to be thinking about. What do you think about this, JC?
Yeah, this is really, really interesting as we see more players and big players coming in and considering different ways to tap into this whole new market. A couple of things come to mind. So, first of all, I think we might see a split in the type of user this platform serves. So, in ChatGPT apps, they made an explicit decision to call them apps, right? So to me, it is like they are trying to bridge the gap between MCP apps and what other users today understand as products or apps. So it's not really technical. It's more they're trying to approach that in a more kind of intuitive way. While what I see right away when you showed me the connectors from Claude is that they also made a decision to probably call it connectors, and it's under settings, so it's a bit more, let's say, hidden or not as visible as OpenAI makes it, for example. So I'm wondering if maybe OpenAI is positioning ChatGPT apps as a more kind of a consumer tool. Well, let's say a Claude, for now, it's approaching this market in a more technical, or as it's, yeah, Anthropic is positioning itself a bit more on the technical side of builder side, right? So maybe their idea of MCP apps is a bit different, how they're framing it, because that's the first thing I see here. Like it's a connector, it's buried under my settings, so it's not the same deliberate action that OpenAI did with the GPT apps, right? I don't know if
You
you.
know, no, I agree with that, but I think that's partly because of who their audiences are. I mean, Anthropic doesn't have the hundreds of 800 million, 900 million users that OpenAI does, and they're much more focused on businesses anyway. OpenAI is very focused on the consumer, and historically, I think they're trying to change that because they're seeing that Anthropic is getting a lot of mind share with its very good code-based tooling and now co-work, which is super powerful. So yeah, I agree. I think historically that's been true, and I think as you say, it's probably coming out in the way that it's not calling MCP apps, calling it connectors. It's not really talking about. I think possibly the difference here is I don't think, and I could be wrong about this, I don't think they're necessarily limiting it just to MCP apps, i.e. ones with the UI. They can also be MCPs here. I mean, in theory, I guess that's probably true for both OpenAI, but I don't think that's as focused on the sort of app part, as you say, as OpenAI is. The other thing I think is interesting is, again, it's always interesting to see how Elliot and his team are looking at, monitoring discoverability. So they've obviously got this thing where they monitor in their website app discoverability, they monitor, all the apps that have been published, and it's interesting to see that ChatGPT got 257 in their app store, and Claude Connect's 185, which is interesting. And it's also interesting to see down here, they also talk about which ones are on both, which is kind of interesting. So, there's a fraction of people on both, but they've also, you can see that ChatGPT has a lot more on its own than Claude does. But I think Claude is catching up. I do feel like OpenAI is very slow to publish apps. I know of people who've been waiting weeks to have their app published. So it is a long process, and I think they're getting faster. I think if we have a look at the tracking page, you can see. Just see if I can find it. Yeah, you can see how the apps have been released. So, up until late January, there was nothing really launched, and now it's slowly going up, but it's not really, it's not shooting up.
Taking
It's
off.
like,
Yeah.
no, it's like a few a day. It's like a couple of days, not very much at all. So it's still taking time to get going. But yeah, it's a really good. This is a great website to see sort of progress. But it's still what it says to me is it's still really early days. There's not been huge progress on the
Definitely.
store. And I guess part of the issue with that is that they need to curate it, but also they need to make it easy to find apps. You put too many in, and you start having the sort of for mobile phone app store problem of having just huge amounts of rubbish in there that's hard to kind of navigate your way through. So it's going to be interesting to see how they start to let more apps in and how that often that happens.
Right. I guess, well, I'd be interested to see where the overlap between ChatGPT and Claude apps are. Maybe that's something that we can invite everyone to, to go to Elliot's website and just check it out or contact them, because I think
Yeah,
this is a really valuable piece of information for anyone building MCP apps and for anyone interested in the space. So I think this is just the beginning. Again, we are seeing how MCPs are getting this new AI, UI layer on it, and how it's shaping the whole product surface, right? Like how a product is consumed. And I think this is just another, let's say, symptom of that happening. And we'll keep seeing, as you say, like maybe Microsoft or Cursor and Visual Studio, they get their own thing going on. So I think it's just another proof um, that this is how products are evolving in general. So now, if we think about an app, we still think that that is a wrapper of different UI elements that are connected to certain APIs that then give you certain data or perform certain actions. But now what we're seeing is that, I mean, maybe to us both, it is becoming more and more clear that there is a new way of interacting and consuming products, which is through the chat interface, right? So
yeah.
basically, a product might very well be in a couple of years or actually months, just these specific layers built around, well, APIs. That's it, right? So again,
Well,
we
yeah. I
understand.
mean, the best analogy for me is this idea. I mean, so in sort of the computer world, in the Unix way was that people would build small utilities that work really, really well in one specific task. And then you could kind of join them together to do really complex things. You see this a bit when you do use some of the AI tools. When it uses a grep to look for text within a file, it will then use a thing called pipe, where it then pipe it to another utility. For example, you could say, oh, look through this file, pull out the lines with this text in, and then count the numbers, right? So that would use three different small pieces of code: one to show the file, one to look for the piece of text, and one to do the counting. So you have like three small pieces of utilities that we kind of join together. And the way I look at this is, I think the MCP apps are like those utilities. They're little small pieces or very, very focused, very efficient sort of functions that the LLM kind of orchestrates together to get to what you need. So, LLM would pull data from one source, it would do some operations on it, maybe clean up, maybe pull out certain information, it would then send it to another utility or pull more data from another place, join that together, and send it to a third place, and maybe you then take it all together and execute on it. So this idea of small, very focused, very useful utilities, I feel is like where it's going. And I think this is where, as we mentioned last time, it's kind of providing a bit of wake up call to these big application providers that try and do all this functionality. And they often, if you look at most tools, most big SaaS products do a couple of things really, really well, and then have a lot of like ancillary stuff that they've added on over the years, which is kind of okay, but isn't necessarily best in breed. And I think it's that kind of extra functionality which you don't really care about, but you're having to pay for as part of your subscription, that I think is where things will change. I think, what we probably, I think what should, to my mind, what should happen is SaaS products should really focus down and reduce their functionality to the core of what they do and offer that as an MCP, so that it could be the LLM can then join it together. And I think it's going to create a bit of a friction, because it means that they have to effectively reduce the value as they see it to their users, but then get to be much more. It's kind of, I guess it's effective value. It's rather than paying for stuff you don't care about, you only pay for what you use. Is where I think people are going to go to, and that's where it's going to need to change. And I think that's going to be, I think, the theme of the next couple of years as people think about this and try and apply it to their businesses.
I fully agree. I think the big companies, the big players, if they don't do this kind of a reduction of their offering and product, um, as this whole new ecosystem evolves, they're either gonna be out of the market, or probably they're gonna be forced to reduce, well, basically the functionalities into um, yeah, more focus specific tasks that and the pricing, yeah, will be probably like usage based instead of a subscription that yeah, people end up paying for, and maybe they're not using like 80% of the product. So I do fully agree with that take. I think that's where things are going. And yeah, I think on the positive side for these big players, I think the fact, or the big swing, if they adopt this new, they start adopting this new model of creating product and offering that to people, they are also going to see a reduction in their costs, right? Because as you're saying, they have like a couple of things that they do really, really well, all these SaaS platforms, and then they have like the rest of ancillary features that they are still paying for in terms of well, features they need to upkeep or produce every couple of months or years or whatever. So there's a lot of running cost there. So it will force them to basically be way more focused into what really drives the value for the users. So I think it can actually be a good way to force them to rethink the product cost. I think we'll start seeing a lot of smaller teams as well. I guess that's also what we are seeing. Developers are now able to offer a lot more value to people with yeah, smaller scope in the product offering. So I think MCP apps will only allow more of that to happen. So
Yeah,
I'm really keen on seeing how this all evolves, and we'll be here to keep monitoring and sharing all we keep learning. Right?
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. See you in the next one. Bye.
See you.